Welcome back to the channel. This is Abba with CoffeeNCode. Today I'll be having a look at exceptions. In the last video I covered a function called try_parse that would prevent a situation that would end in the program closing. This is the exact situation I used in the last video. If you'd like to check out that video, please click in the banner above and come back to this video. Another way of being able to stop this function from failing is by using exception. So let me just demonstrate what the exception will be. If you run the program and it says enter a number and you type a number in, then nothing will happen. If the user were to type in something like hi, then you'll find an exception and your program will close. And if we use Ctrl F5, you can run this as non-debugging, and if you try it now in a real world situation, then you will see this ugly string appear and it will say that it stopped working and you'll have to close your program down and you'll lose all of the data stored in the variables that you had open. In this small example, you have nothing open, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But in a big program, you want to avoid exceptions as much as possible. So in the last video, we used something called try_parse. In this video, we will try and do something called try_catch. So to write this out, you type in try, followed by the curly braces, and just after the last curly brace, you type in catch, and then in the brackets, you type in the exception that you want to catch. And in the brackets here, you will do what happens if the exception returns. So for the purpose of this example, we can use something called an exception, which will catch every single exception. It doesn't have to be a specific exception. And then in the console.writeline, we could just say something like an error has occurred. So how these work, it asks you to try something, and then it catches anything if it goes wrong. So the thing that's problematic for us in this code is reading in the value. So let's try and do these two lines of code, and then if something were to go wrong, we can see it here. Now this console.writeline is complaining about the number because it doesn't exist, because it's initialized right here. So we can either bring this line in, or we could have initialized the integer outside here, and then we have access to it at the bottom, but just for the sake of this example, we'll keep it all inside here. So now if we run the code, type 15, it runs exactly as promised, but if we type in hi, then what happens is it says an error has occurred, but as you can see, our program is still standing. And if we press enter, it will go from this line that had a problem, it will jump inside the exception, it printed an error has occurred, and then it stayed on the read line, so our program has executed from top to bottom without any major issues. Now the problem is our program didn't really perform how we wanted it to. So what we can do is we can write ourselves a little while loop. So we can have a b continue, and we can initialize that to true, and then we can have a while loop, while b continue, and then we can place our try inside here. So now our program will look like this. We set up our boolean variable, and then we loop while b continue set to true. We only want it to keep repeating when indeed something has went wrong. So we could set b continue to being true inside here, but we don't need to set it to true because it already is true. So the only time we need to change the value of b continue is when something has been successful. So we can change b continue in here to false, and we can place this at the end. So we can output the value to the user, then we can output the number, print the number to the screen, set b continue to false so it stops the while loop, and then when it hits the bottom and it checks its condition, it will just drop out and it should output this message, goodbye. Let's give it a test. Enter a number, hi, and then error occurred. It will then keep b continue as true, so it'll loop around, hit this line again, and it will start again. And until we enter a separate value that is indeed an integer, 15, then it will come into here, set the value 15 into the integer called num, output it to the screen, set b continue to being false, and when it hits the end of the while loop, it will check this condition, then it'll kick us out the while loop, and then it'll print the goodbye and wait at the console read line. So just a quick recap. We've created a boolean variable, and we have repeated the while loop, and the only time we're changing b continue is when our output is indeed correct, because if something goes wrong, we want to set it to true, but if it's already true, we don't need to set it again, and this is the part where it will go wrong. In the error has occurred section, and then it will loop around and keep going until we hit this b continues false. So how the try catch works is we try any code that's inside the curly braces, and if anything were to go drastically wrong that will cause an exception to occur, then it comes inside these curly braces, and then you deal with it separately in here. The good thing about try catch is when an exception occurs, your program doesn't fail and corrupt. It just stays running and it'll come into here instead of closing the program down and showing a very ugly error message to the user. All this is doing is converting the string into an integer and then outputting it to the screen. Nothing complicated. This is used to demonstrate our try and catch expression. If you wanted to be very specific about the exceptions that you wanted to catch, then you can let the exception occur, and then you can have a look and see which exception is being raised, and then you know which ones to catch. So if we comment out this code and just have it without the try catch and run the code again and we trigger the exception, we can see that it says it was a system.format exception. So what we can do here, instead of having exception, we can have a format exception. And if we run the code now and then try it again, it will still work. Now what you can do in common practices is you can catch the exception that you want specifically and that you're aware of, and then you can actually chain these try catches and it will check them in order. So if an error occurs, it will check the first catch to see if it is indeed a format exception, and then you could output a message in here. And the good thing about doing this is your messages can be different. You could say in here, because this is very specific to the function that you're calling, you could say your string is not in the correct format for an integer. And in the catch exception, you could generate a generic message saying an error occurred. And the good thing about this pattern is that you can catch the ones that you want and then output a very specific message based on an exception, and then if all else fails and something very drastic happens and you don't know and you weren't aware of that exception that was going to be fired, then you can have a catch all just to give the user a very generic error occurred. If you leave it just like this, only catching one specific exception, then if something else occurs that you're not aware of, then the program will still corrupt and end, and you don't want that. If you're going to chain multiple catches, you should all really include a catch all just in case something happens that you're unaware of. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this video helped. I'm going to be making a C# course coming up soon, so keep your eye out. In the meantime, if you want to check out my Patreon to support the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.